The arena of professional football is defined by brutal, high-stakes competition. But for some of the league's most emotionally invested athletes, the most challenging confrontations do not happen on the turf under the Friday night lights. They erupt in the quiet, brightly lit confines of the post-game press conference. This is where the raw emotion of a grueling battle meets the cold, often cynical calculation of the modern sports media, a fusion point that inevitably generates tension, drama, and some of the most viral player-reporter shutdowns ever recorded. We are talking about the moments when the veneer of professionalism cracks, when disrespect is met with a devastating counterattack, and when athletes, pushed to their absolute limits, finally expose the toxic and self-serving nature of certain segments of the reporting industry, making it clear that they are utterly done with the antagonistic dynamic. The fundamental divide is one of perspective. The player sees commitment, sacrifice, and a lifelong devotion to the game, whereas the interviewers are often tasked with extracting clicks, manufacturing controversy, or applying simplified, often ill-informed critiques that utterly fail to capture the complexity of the action. A scenario that is practically designed to trigger a dramatic, explosive reaction that serves only the media's hunger for spectacle. Consider the immediate aftermath of a brutal, soul-crushing loss. A low-point Trevon Diggs was forced to navigate after the Cowboys' season-ending defeat to the rival 49ers. A moment where a player's entire emotional dam breaks under the weight of disappointment and public scrutiny. In the midst of this profound frustration, a local reporter, Mike Leslie, chose to focus not on the effort of the team or the gravity of the loss, but on a single play, specifically questioning Diggs' effort on a George Kittle catch. A public challenge that struck at the core of the player's integrity and commitment, crossing a professional boundary. The confrontation that ensued was raw and unforgettable, a verbal explosion where Diggs' frustration boiled over, not just at the question, but at the underlying arrogance of a commentator who, from the safety of the press box, dared to critique the dedication of an athlete who lives and breathes the game every day, demanding to know how a person who doesn't even comprehend the fundamental mechanics of the defense can possibly pass judgment on a split-second decision in a critical moment. This wasn't a debate about strategy. It was a visceral challenge to an identity, a moment where the player completely stripped away the politeness of the press conference to deliver a message. Stay in your lane. Stop reducing the complexity of a lifetime of sacrifice to a single, easily digestible duet. A negative soundbite that drives views, an explosion that, while later apologized for, resonated because every athlete understands the sting of their effort being casually dismissed. The media, however, is not always seeking controversy in the post-game analysis. Sometimes the confrontation is a result of deeply ingrained, casual disrespect that has little to do with the sport itself. A fact perfectly illustrated by the massive firestorm surrounding Cam Newton in 2017. When reporter Jordan Rodrigue asked a technical question about route running, a subject she was clearly knowledgeable about. Newton's response was an immediate, condescending laugh, followed by the now infamous remark that it was funny to hear a female talk about routes. A moment of sexism so blatant that the entire league, and indeed the players' sponsors, were forced to reckon with the cultural implications. This particular shutdown was not one of defiance against a negative critique, but rather a catastrophic self-own. A careless remark that instantly exposed a deep-seated bias and overshadowed any discussion of the game. Proving that the most damaging confrontations are often those that reveal a character flaw rather than simply a competitive dispute. The resulting condemnation was swift and absolute, with a major sponsor severing ties immediately, cementing the understanding that disrespect, particularly the kind that targets identity, carries a far heavier penalty than any on-field infraction. A lesson in accountability the media was all too eager to enforce and broadcast. Yet another form of media antagonism revolves around hunting for a pre-existing narrative, seizing on any visual cue that seems to confirm a cynical storyline, a dynamic that tragically played out with former Cardinals quarterback Derek Anderson in 2010. During a truly brutal, demoralizing loss, a camera caught Anderson laughing on the sidelines, an innocuous moment the player later explained as an attempt to maintain a positive outlook amidst crushing defeat, but which was instantly weaponized by a reporter seeking to confirm a narrative of the team's dysfunction. When questioned about the moment, Anderson didn't just disagree. He utterly unraveled in a devastating emotional meltdown, passionately, almost desperately defending his dedication by shouting about how he puts his freaking heart and soul into this every single week, detailing his relentless study. Habits and the profound shame of being embarrassed on a national stage. This instance shows the horrifying asymmetry of the player-media relationship. The reporter's simple question, derived from a single out-of-context frame, forced the player to engage in a televised public dissection of his deepest feelings, compelling him to prove his seriousness and emotional investment to a skeptical audience that had already judged him based on a manufactured controversy. A true breakdown that highlighted the cruelty of the narrative-driven press. No player, however, has so skillfully utilized the media shutdown as a tool of intellectual warfare quite like Richard Sherman, who transformed the entire press conference dynamic into a battle of wits, particularly against persistent antagonists like Skip Bayless. In a legendary on-air segment, when Bayless attempted to downplay his success, Sherman didn't engage in an emotional argument. He performed an intellectual demolition, demanding that Bayless address him only as all-pro Stanford graduate, a masterful rhetorical move that framed the reporter's critique not as a legitimate journalistic opinion, but as the envious, unaccomplished commentary of an intellectual inferior. Sherman's point was devastatingly simple. His on-field performance and his academic achievements were his resume proof of accomplishment that stood in stark contrast to a pundit whose career was built on contrarian opinions rather than substantive achievements. A complete and total reversal of the power dynamic. This was a shutdown cemented not by yelling or storming off, but by an articulate, devastating intellectual critique that exposed the pundit's lack of gravitas and permanently shifted the perception of Sherman from a trash-talking cornerback to one of the most intellectually fierce and boldly outspoken figures in the history of the sport, a player who not only dominated opponents, but also routinely exposed the limitations of the media complex. The pressure to manage team narratives and prevent internal division is another critical flashpoint, one that led to a deeply heated exchange involving Michael Strahan in 2006. Strahan had criticised teammate Plaxico Barres on the radio, only to be confronted in person by a reporter, Kelly Nacke, who approached the issue with a seemingly antagonistic framing designed to elicit further conflict and division, prompting Strahan to completely lose his temper. The confrontation became intensely personal, with Strahan demanding the reporter look him in the eye and accusing her of trying to kill him, or divide teammates with negative commentary, turning the focus from his words to the media's manipulative tactics. This moment was less about a soundbite and more about the player's refusal to be a pawn in a larger media game of locker room drama, passionately defending the sanctity of team unity against the divisive forces of sensational journalism that seek to magnify every minor internal conflict into a crisis. Strahan's fury, though seen by some as bullying, was a profound defense of his role as a leader and a powerful rebuke of the media's practice of exploiting vulnerability for the sake of newspaper sales and controversial television segments. Standing as a testament to the player's refusal to feed the negativity machine, a defining moment of taking control of the narrative. The confrontations have continued in recent years, proving that this adversarial relationship remains a defining feature of the league landscape, seen clearly in the sharp, highly charged exchange between Baker Mayfield and a Cleveland reporter in 2019. When the reporter questioned the urgency of a failed offensive drive, Mayfield, who had the full context of a preceding penalty and a running clock, immediately snapped, cutting off the follow-up with a sharp insistent stop saying but, utterly refusing to let the reporter frame the moment with a simplistic, incomplete critique. Mayfield's response was a rare display of a player, demanding that the media acknowledge the complexity of the game, refusing to accept the reduction of a strategic moment into a simple, headline-ready judgment about a lack of urgency. demonstrating a commitment to competitive excellence that did not permit lazy journalism. He saw the question as a deliberate attempt to generate controversy, calling it the dumbest question you could ask, a direct challenge to the reporter's professional competence. Were named a continuous trend where athletes use their platforms to push back against ill-informed and deliberately antagonistic media commentary, choosing confrontation over passive acceptance of a negative narrative. Ultimately, these explosive interactions, from the emotional defenses of personal integrity to the calculated intellectual takedowns of professional critics, are not isolated temper tantrums, but symptoms of a fundamental ongoing power struggle between the athletes who bleed for the game and the powerful media apparatus that profits from their pain and their setbacks. They represent a cultural shift where players, empowered by social media, are no longer willing to quietly endure the constant onslaught of disrespect, negativity, and simplistic analysis from a press corps they often view as entirely detached from the sacrifices required to perform at the highest level. Whether it is Trevon Diggs refusing to have his effort questioned, Richard Sherman using his intellect to dismantle a pundit's authority, or Michael Strahan demanding respect for team unity, each shutdown is a clear, definitive moment where the players, collectively and individually, declare that the era of passive compliance is over, and they will fight relentlessly to control their own narrative against interviewers who prioritize drama over truth, firmly cementing the legacy of the athlete who refuses to be silenced by the toxic cycle of media controversy.